Hey there, welcome to my channel. I'm here to help you relax tonight. I know many of you use this video to fall asleep. So, before you get cozy, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd love to hear from you. Story 1. On an ordinary Monday morning, 4 commuters boarded the same rural highway bus out of Grayson County and never came home. Their belongings were found scattered in the seats, the engine still running, headlights burning into the foggy dawn. But the passengers were gone. No sign of struggle, no blood, just silence. What happened en route 16 that morning would haunt investigators for years, as every new lead revealed that the truth was far darker and far closer to home than anyone dared believe. The air that morning carried a chill, the kind of damp cold that crept into the bones and lingered long after the sun rose. It was the last Monday of September, and Grayson County, a small agricultural community nestled between rolling hills and stretches of forest, was stirring awake in its usual sleepy rhythm. Most mornings in Grayson looked the same. Farmers moving equipment onto fields, shopkeepers unlocking doors, kids dragging book bags onto yellow school buses. But on Route 16, at the county's main commuter bus stop, for ordinary people gathered for a ride they would never finish. The bus stop itself wasn't much, just a weathered metal shelter, a bench with a crack running through its wooden slats, and a faded county sign that leaned ever so slightly toward the road. It sat beside a patch of gravel surrounded on 3 sides by fields. From there, commuters could catch the 6:15 a.m. bus into the city about 40 minutes east. For years, it had been a lifeline for locals who worked office jobs, taught in schools, or pulled shifts at the factories that lined the outskirts of Fairmont, the nearest city. That morning, the fog was heavy, draped low over the cornfields and hovering on the asphalt like smoke. The bus's headlights appeared first, twin beams slicing through the mist as it lumbered closer. But before the bus arrived, its passengers gathered one by one, each unaware that this morning, this ordinary beginning, would be the last anyone saw of them alive. For the first to arrive was Laura Benton, a 27-year-old elementary school teacher. She carried a large tote bag filled with lesson plans and grading folders, the edges of colored construction paper poking out. Laura was known in town as patient, kind, and tireless. She still lived with her mother in a modest ranch-style house on the edge of Grayson, saving money to eventually buy her own place. That morning, she wore her usual teaching attire, a cardigan over a blouse, sensible shoes, and her hair pulled back neatly. A fellow teacher would later describe her as someone who always left too early and came home too late, like she carried the whole classroom on her shoulders. Next came Daniel Whitaker, a 44-year-old machinist who worked at one of the Fairmont auto plants. Broad-shouldered and reserved, Daniel had been riding the Route 16 bus for nearly a decade. Neighbors knew him as a family man, though his wife Marianne had quietly separated from him 6 months earlier. Their teenage son stayed with Daniel most weeks, though not this particular Monday morning. He carried a lunch pail and a folded newspaper under his arm, his routine so ingrained that fellow passengers often joked you could set your watch by him. The third passenger was Chloe Harris, 32, a paralegal at a law firm in Fairmont. Chloe wasn't originally from Grayson. She had moved there 2 years earlier from Cleveland, renting a small apartment above the hardware store downtown. People described her as private, though friendly with a quick wit when she chose to share it. Unlike the others, Chloe's presence in Grayson felt temporary. She never seemed fully rooted, as though she were always preparing for her next move. That morning, she carried a leather briefcase and smoked a cigarette while waiting, exhaling thin streams into the cold air. Finally, there was Mark Weaver, the youngest of the group at 19. He was a community college student commuting to classes in Fairmont. Mark was lanky, perpetually tired-looking, and often seen wearing oversized hoodies. He came from one of Grayson's oldest farming families, though he had little interest in following that path. His father had grown frustrated with him, neighbors said, while his mother defended him as a boy, still figuring things out. Mark carried a worn backpack, slung carelessly over one shoulder, and kept his earbuds in, nodding faintly to music only he could hear. The four of them rarely interacted beyond polite nods. They were not friends. They were not enemies. They were simply people sharing the same small ritual, climbing aboard the same bus day after day to lives that intersected only here at the county stop. The bus driver, the 615 bus, was driven that morning by Robert Bobby Larkin, a man in his late 50s with a salt and pepper mustache and a reputation for punctuality. Bobby had driven the Route 16 commuter line for 12 years. He knew the roads better than most, and he knew many of his passengers by name, even if they hardly spoke. Bobby's routine was to wave from the driver's seat as each person stepped aboard, then settle into a steady rhythm that carried him eastward along the winding highway. Later, Bobby would be described as the kind of man who just did his job. No fuss. He didn't make small talk unless prompted, but he remembered the details. Passengers shared the name of Laura's school, Daniel's favorite baseball team, Chloe's law firm, Mark's college courses. These small fragments of their lives existed in Bobby's memory, scattered like notes on a map he could never have guessed would soon matter. That morning, Bobby arrived on time. The bus's brakes hissed as it pulled to a stop, headlights illuminating the fog. The four boarded one after the other, dropping coins and tickets into the slot with the quiet efficiency of people half asleep, minds already in the day ahead. They took their usual seats, Laura toward the middle, Daniel near the front, Chloe by the window halfway back, and Mark in the very rear, slouched with his music. By 6:17, the bus was rolling eastward, tail lights glowing red in the mist until they disappeared around a curve. The last sightings. Though no one realized it at the time, several locals caught glimpses of that bus during its final journey. A farmer named Eldon Tate, tending his field near Route 16, recalled seeing the bus roll past around 6:30. He remembered the headlights cutting through the fog, though he couldn't see the passengers inside. A waitress at Maggie's Diner, which sat near mile marker 22, told police she saw the bus cruise by as she carried supplies in from her car. She noted nothing unusual, only that the vehicle seemed to move slower than usual, as though the driver were being cautious. And a trucker named Ron Ellis passed the bus near mile marker 37 around 640. He would later tell investigators something odd, that he thought he saw more people than usual inside the bus. When pressed, he admitted it was only a fleeting impression. The bus passed quickly, the fog was thick, and the morning light was weak. But Ron swore he glimpsed movement that suggested at least 5 or 6 figures inside, not just for passengers and a driver. This statement would become one of the earliest and most haunting details of the case. The bus that never arrived. The Route 16 commuter bus was due to arrive at Fairmont's Central Terminal at 7:05 a.m. when it failed to appear. A dispatcher radioed Bobby's line. There was no response. At first, no one panicked. Delays happened, especially on foggy mornings. But when another bus driver checked the usual route and reported no sign of Bobby's bus, concern began to mount. By 8 o'clock, calls were made to the Grayson County Sheriff's Office. Families of the missing commuters began phoning in, confused as to why their loved ones had not reached their jobs, classrooms, or offices. By mid-morning, deputies were dispatched along Route 16 to search for the vehicle. At 10:12 a.m., they found it. The discovery. The bus sat on the shoulder near mile marker 42, its engine still running, headlights piercing the fog even as the sun had burned most of it away. The doors were open, the interior lights glowed dimly, and the seats, 5 in total that should have been occupied, were empty. Inside, deputies found belongings scattered. Laura's tote bag on the floor, papers spilled in disarray. Daniel's lunch pail still latched shut on the seat beside him. Chloe's briefcase propped against the window unopened. Mark's backpack slumped on the rear seat, earbuds dangling out, and Bobby's cap resting on the dashboard as though he had set it down only moments earlier. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no broken glass. Nothing that suggested violence, only a chilling emptiness, as though the passengers had simply risen, walked off, and vanished into the morning air. Deputy reports noted the eeriness of the scene. The bus smelled faintly of cigarette smoke, unusual since Chloe typically smoked before boarding, but not inside. The aisle showed faint scuff marks, but nothing conclusive. The driver's seatbelt was unfastened and the keys were still in the ignition. It was as if time had frozen, then skipped forward, leaving only questions in its wake. The town reacts. By that evening, word had spread across Grayson. The missing commuters became the subject of every conversation. In the diner booths, in church basement, in the aisles of the grocery store, families clung to hope, imagining that the group might have disembarked for some emergency, that perhaps they would call or walk into town any moment. But others whispered darker theories. Some believed the bus had been hijacked. Others speculated about cult activity, recalling old rumors about Route 16 and its proximity to abandoned quarries where strange gatherings had supposedly taken place years earlier. And a few muttered about supernatural explanations. The fog, the silence, the way the bus seemed to carry no trace of where its passengers had gone. Sheriff's deputies organized search parties. Dogs were brought in to track scents. Helicopters scanned the surrounding forest and fields. For days, they found nothing. Not a footprint, not a shred of clothing. Nothing that explained how 5 people could vanish in plain sight from a moving bus on a well-traveled road. The case quickly drew regional attention. Local news crews reported live from Route 16, their voices carrying urgency as camera lights cut against the shadows. 5 souls vanished without a trace, 1 anchor intoned. An entire community left searching for answers. The first break. On the 4th day, investigators combing the area near mile marker 37 made a discovery in a shallow ditch off the roadside, half hidden by weeds. They found a crumpled cigarette butt. Forensic testing later confirmed it matched the brand Chloe Harris smoked. But what unsettled investigators most was this. It was not found near mile marker 42, where the bus had been discovered. Instead, it was 5 miles earlier, exactly where trucker Ron Ellis had claimed to see extra figures moving inside the bus. It was the first hint that whatever happened on Route 16 that morning didn't occur at the bus's final resting place, but somewhere in between. The mystery of the missing Grayson commuters had begun, and soon the shadows surrounding Route 16 would reveal that this was no random disappearance at all. The bus sat where deputies first found it. Mile marker 42 eastbound shoulder of Route 16, like a ghostly monument. Its engine idled quietly when discovered, a steady hum against the morning fog. But by the time forensic teams arrived later that day, it had been shut down. What remained was silence, and questions. The Grayson County Sheriff's Office treated the vehicle as both a crime scene and a riddle. Sheriff Douglas Harper, a square-jawed man in his late 50s with 25 years on the force, arrived just after noon. He circled the bus slowly, hands on his hips, his boots crunching on gravel. Deputies kept a respectful distance, watching as he paused at the open door, the yawning interior behind him like the throat of a cave. 5 people don't just vanish, Harper muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. But in that moment, standing at the threshold of the empty bus, he realized that was exactly what had happened inside the bus. The forensic sweep began with photographs. Dozens of angles captured the interior. Every seat, every scuff mark, every item left behind. The evidence told a story, but it was fragmented, like pages torn from a book and scattered in the wind. Laura Benton's tote bag had spilled its contents across the aisle. Construction paper, notebooks, and a handful of crayons were strewn about. One deputy noted that the crayons had rolled beneath seats as though dropped suddenly with no time to gather them. Daniel Whitaker's lunch pail rested unopened on his seat. Inside were 2 sandwiches wrapped neatly in wax paper, an apple, and a thermos of coffee still warm when discovered. That detail unnerved Sheriff Harper more than anything. The idea that Daniel had been only moments from taking a bite before disappearing into nothing. Chloe Harris's briefcase sat against the window, clasped shut. Papers inside revealed a case she had been assisting on. A corporate fraud matter, nothing unusual. Yet the handle was damp, smeared faintly as though gripped by nervous or hurried hands. Mark Weaver's backpack was zipped but partially crushed against the rear seat. Inside were textbooks, loose papers, and a half-empty bottle of soda. His earbuds dangled uselessly, one resting on the floor like a coiled snake. And at the front, on the dashboard, Bobby Larkin's driver's cap lay neatly placed as though sat down intentionally. His seatbelt hung and used at the side. But what unsettled investigators most wasn't what was left behind. It was what was absent. There were no signs of struggle, no fingerprints beyond the usual, no drag marks on the floor, no shards of broken glass, no blood. The vehicle was intact. The fuel gauge reading just under 3/4. The bus hadn't crashed, hadn't broken down. It had simply stopped the odor. Several deputies reported a faint smell inside. Cigarette smoke lingered, though smoking had been banned on buses for years, and Bobby had been known to enforce that rule. Chloe Harris had smoked while waiting at the stop, yes, but never once inside during her ride. The smoke was strange too. Acrid, heavier than a fresh cigarette. More like something had burned briefly, then been extinguished. Forensic teams swabbed surfaces, hoping to detect residue, but the samples returned inconclusive. Sheriff Harper wrote in his notes, "Odor present, not cigarette alone. Closer to char ash, but no burn damage. Origin unknown. The driver's seat." Attention soon turned to Bobby's seat. Deputies noted the ignition key was still inserted, turned to the on position. The bus engine had been running when found, suggesting Bobby had not voluntarily abandoned his post. His seatbelt was unbuckled, but there were faint impressions in the worn leather cushion. as though he had been seated only minutes before. One peculiar detail emerged. The driver's mirror was tilted awkwardly, facing slightly inward rather than outward toward traffic. Had Bobby adjusted it himself, or had someone else sat there after him? The idea chilled the sheriff. The first theory, voluntary departure. Some deputies floated a simple theory. The passengers and driver had stepped off for some reason. Maybe Bobby pulled over due to engine trouble, or maybe someone felt ill. They could have wandered into the fields, gotten disoriented in the fog. But if that were true, where were they? Search dogs tracked no scent leading away from the bus. The surrounding fields were soft earth, yet no footprints disturbed the surface. Even the dew remained unbroken. It was as though the passengers had evaporated into thin air. Sheriff Harper dismissed the voluntary departure theory by the end of day one. The second theory, forced removal. The next possibility was darker. Could another vehicle have intercepted them? Could armed hijackers have forced the passengers out, loaded them into a separate car or truck, and driven away? At first, this seemed plausible. After all, the doors were open when the bus was found. But then came the problem. No one reported seeing a suspicious vehicle on Route 16 that morning. The highway had been quiet, yes, but not deserted. Truckers, farmers, and early commuters would likely have noticed another car pulled alongside a county bus. Moreover, if hijackers had been involved, why leave everything behind? Purses, bags, food, all untouched. There was no robbery here. No motive presented itself. Witness reports the investigators revisited the timeline. 6:15 a.m. The bus departs Grayson County stop with 4 passengers and driver Bobby Larkin. 6:30 a.m. Farmer Eldon Tate sees the bus pass his fields. 6:35 a.m. Waitress at Maggie's Diner notices bus heading east slower than usual. 6:40 a.m. trucker Ron Ellis claims to see extra movement inside. More than 4 passengers. By 7:05, the bus should have arrived at Fairmont Terminal. Instead, at 10:12 a.m., it was discovered at mile marker 42, 2 miles beyond Ellis's sighting. What happened in that 2M stretch? Ron Ellis's statement became critical. His claim about extra figures inside suggested that someone or something had joined the bus between Grayson and mile marker 37. But how? No one had seen the bus stop. No one had seen anyone board unless they hadn't come from the road at all. The missing time. Investigators noted the eerie detail. The bus had been running when discovered. That meant its engine had been idling for at least 3 hours. Yet, the fuel gauge suggested almost no consumption. Mechanics later estimated the bus must have been shut off for a portion of that time, then restarted. If so, by whom? The possibility emerged that whoever caused the disappearance had returned the bus, leaving it staged like a warning. This theory unsettled Sheriff Harper deeply. It meant the culprit wanted the vehicle found. Family reactions. Back in town, families clung to hope. Laura Benton's mother, Margaret, wept on local television, holding her daughter's school photo. She's a teacher. She's good. Please bring her back. Daniel Whitaker's arranged wife, Marianne, spoke only briefly, her voice flat. Our son deserves to know what happened to his father. Chloe Harris's landlord described her as quiet but decent, while reporters dug into her past in Cleveland. Mark Weaver's parents were shattered. His father paced their farmhouse porch endlessly, while his mother clutched a rosary, whispering prayers into the night. Bobby Larkin's wife, Carol, insisted he would never abandon his passengers. He took pride in that job. If he's gone, something terrible happened. The grief was raw, but beneath it ran a current of suspicion. Some whispered one of the missing must have orchestrated it. Others speculated that Chloe, the outsider, was connected to something dark in Fairmont. Rumors spread faster than facts. The phantom handprint. 3 days after the bus was recovered, forensic teams discovered something they'd missed. On the inside of the rear window, faint but visible under ultraviolet light, was the outline of a handprint. Long, narrow fingers pressed against the glass. It was not positioned where any passenger normally sat. It was higher, almost level with the top of the glass. Too high, investigators noted, for Mark Weaver in the back seat, unless he had stood on the cushion and reached upward. The print was smeared as though whoever made it had dragged their hand downward before disappearing. Tests failed to identify DNA. The oils were degraded, unusual for a mark less than a week old. The handprint became the first true piece of evidence that someone had been on that bus who should not have been. A growing fear. By the end of the first week, Sheriff Harper was exhausted. Reporters camped outside the sheriff's office. The FBI was now circling the case, considering it both a possible kidnapping and a potential act of domestic terrorism. But in Grayson County, townsfolk whispered a different word: cursed. Route 16 had always carried stories. Farmers spoke of strange lights hovering above the fields. Truckers muttered about shadows that darted across the road in fog. And now, with 5 people gone, the road's reputation twisted into something darker. Every night, Sheriff Harper drove past mile marker 42. He would stop, step out, and listen. The silence was heavy. The empty bus had been towed away, yet the air seemed to hum with something unfinished. The sheriff wrote in his notebook, "Feels like the bus is still there. Feels like they're still inside waiting." The lead investigator's nightmare. One night, after returning home late, Harper fell into restless sleep. He dreamed of the bus sitting in fog. The interior lights glowed faintly, and inside the 5 missing commuters sat in silence. They did not speak, did not move. Their faces were pale, their eyes unfocused, as though staring beyond him, and in the driver's seat, someone else sat. Not Bobby, a figure too tall, its head brushing the ceiling, its face blurred like smoke. When Harper jolted awake, sweat on his brow, he tried to dismiss it. Just a dream born of exhaustion. But part of him wondered if it was more because deep down he could not shake the feeling that whatever had boarded the bus that morning had not been human. The bus was empty, but the emptiness itself felt alive. And soon investigators would discover the next clue, one buried in the fog, waiting to drag them further into the mystery. That was the word that haunted investigators more than anything else in the first weeks of the Grayson disappearances. Not blood, not evidence, not motive. Because if the bus was last seen at 6:40 a.m. and it should have arrived in Fairmont at 7:05, then what explained the gap between that sighting and its discovery at 10:12? Nearly 3 full hours had evaporated. 3 hours in which 5 people vanished without trace. The detectives started calling it the lost hour, even though, truthfully, there were 3 of them. The name stuck, shorthand for the time window in which the impossible had happened. Reconstructing the timeline, Sheriff Harper ordered his team to build a timeline wall in the incident room. Red string connected photographs, maps, and witness statements. The whiteboard scrolled with times grew crowded, yet clarity remained elusive. 6:15 a.m., bus departs, Grayson stop. 6:30 a.m. Farmer Tate observes bus heading east. 6:35 a.m. Waitress at Maggie's Diner sees it moving slowly. 6:40 a.m. Trucker Ellis notices extra movement inside. Las 10:12 alta. Bus discovered abandoned mile marker 42. Between 6:40 and 10:12, there was a silence that stretched like a void. What chilled Harper was the lack of sightings. Route 16 wasn't bustling at dawn, but it wasn't deserted either. In nearly 3 hours, no one else saw the vehicle. It was as though it had simply vanished from the highway, then reappeared hours later. The mechanic's puzzle. The bus itself underwent inspection by county mechanics. They reported nothing unusual. Engine healthy, fuel sufficient, electrical systems intact. No malfunctions explained why Bobby would stop. But one detail unsettled them. The odometer reading. The trip meter, usually reset each morning, showed 67 miles driven. The distance between Grayson and Fairmont was only 29 miles. Even factoring in a detour or idling, the numbers didn't make sense. It suggested the bus had traveled further, much further than the stretch investigators believed. But if it had, why had no one seen it? And where had it gone? The fields around mile marker 42. Deputies fanned out across the farmland bordering the highway. The land was flat and open, nothing but stubbled fields and tree lines. Search dogs again failed to pick up fresh scents. Drones scouted from above, scanning for tire tracks, discarded clothing, or disturbed earth. Nothing. At one point, a deputy flagged Sheriff Harper to a patch of mud near the drainage dish. There, faint impressions seemed to mark where the bus's tires had swerved slightly off the road before correcting. But the indentations led nowhere. As Harper crouched by the ditch, he noticed something else. The water in the drainage channel ran dark, thicker than it should, as though some substance had bled into it. Samples were taken. Days later, the lab reported no unusual chemicals, just soil and trace ash. Rumors in town. As the mystery deepened, Grayson's small-town gossip filled the void. At Maggie's Diner, patrons whispered theories over coffee and pie. Some swore it was a cult, strangers in black robes who'd been seen around the county line. Others insisted it was government work, a secret military experiment gone wrong. At night, teenagers dared each other to drive out to mile marker 42. They claimed the road grew unnaturally quiet there, the crickets fading, the air colder. One boy even said he heard faint voices when the wind cut across the fields, whispers that sounded like crime. The sheriff dismissed such talk publicly, but privately he admitted that standing by that marker gave him chills. The stillness there felt unnatural, like the world held its breath. The families demand answers. Tensions grew as families pressed for progress. Margaret Benton, mother of Laura, stormed the sheriff's office one afternoon. "My daughter didn't just disappear into fog," she snapped, slamming her palms on Harper's desk. "Somebody took her. And if you can't find her, maybe the FBI should." Harper tried to reassure her, but her anger echoed his own frustration. Meanwhile, Bobby Larkin's wife, Carol, campaigned for answers in the local paper. Bobby would never abandon his route, she wrote in a letter to the editor. Whoever did this wanted to make him look guilty. The public grew restless and pressure on the sheriff mounted. The surveillance tape. A breakthrough seemed to arrive in the form of grainy surveillance footage. A gas station near mile marker 35, about 5 miles west of where the bus was found, caught something strange. At 6:53 a.m., The camera recorded headlights sweeping across the lot, too high off the ground to be a car, too broad aglow. Investigators believed it was the bus. But here was the strange part. The bus appeared to pause briefly, idling at the edge of the lot before pulling back onto the highway. The tape showed no one exiting, no one entering, just the bus sitting silently for 45 seconds before vanishing east. When the technician enhanced the footage, one detail stood out: the driver's silhouette. It was visible for only a frame or two, but something was off. Bobby Larkin was average height, average build, but the figure in the driver's seat looked taller, its head almost brushing the ceiling of the cabin. The missing radio call. Transit company logs revealed another oddity. Every morning, Bobby radioed the dispatcher upon reaching Fairmont to confirm arrival. On the day of the disappearance, that call never came. However, at 7:22 a.m., dispatch recorded static on the line lasting almost 30 seconds. It was faint, but technicians identified irregular pulses in the noise. When replayed at reduced speed, the static almost resembled words. The technician claimed he could make out one phrase, "Help us." Sheriff Harper listened a dozen times. Maybe it was just pareidolia, the mind imposing meaning on random noise. But the thought of those missing passengers reaching for the radio in desperation clawed at him. The clock that didn't fit. Another strange clue surfaced when investigators catalogued the bus's interior thoroughly. On the dashboard, Bobby kept a small plastic clock, battery operated, its face cracked but functional. He used it to track his stops when the bus's built-in clock malfunctioned. That morning, the plastic clock froze at 7:16 a.m. The hand stuck, unmoving, yet the battery inside was fresh. Lab tests confirmed the mechanism hadn't failed. It had simply stopped. Worse still, at 7:16 a.m., based on all available data, the bus should have been rolling steadily toward Fairmont. Instead, it was as if time itself inside the bus had been paused. A whisper from the fog. One evening, near dusk, Deputy Carol Mendes retraced the bus's route alone. She parked near mile marker 42, headlights cutting through the heavy mist. She sat quietly recording notes when she swore she heard something faint at first, then stronger. Children singing. The melody was thin, distorted, like a record warped by heat. It lasted only seconds, then dissolved into the wind. Mendes later admitted she nearly radioed it in as evidence, but hesitated, afraid of being laughed off the force. Instead, she scribbled the words in her notebook. Sounded like a choir, children's voices coming from the fields. She never showed the note to anyone. Not until months later, theories take shape. By the third week, 3 competing theories dominated the investigation: hijacking and abduction. The passengers were forcibly taken by unknown individuals, possibly tied to organized crime or human trafficking. Staged disappearance. One of the passengers engineered the event, luring the others into a trap, though the motive remained unclear. Unexplained phenomenon. Whispers of something stranger. Abductions not by men, but by forces the sheriff refused to put in official reports. Harper, though pragmatic, couldn't dismiss the strange details. The frozen clock, the odometer, the static message, the shadow in the gas station tape. Each pointed to something beyond a clean criminal motive. The sheriff's revelation. Late one night, Harper sat alone in his office, staring at the evidence board. Photographs of the bus, the passengers, the map, the red string of connections tangled like veins. He replayed Ron Ellis's words in his mind. Looked like there were more people in there. What if Ellis was right? What if the lost hour wasn't about where the bus went, but who had joined it? The idea chilled him because it meant that somewhere on Route 16, between the diner and mile marker 42, a stranger had boarded the bus. A stranger no one saw enter and no one saw leave. And if that was true, then the mystery wasn't just about 5 missing people. It was about a 6th passenger. By the end of week 3, Sheriff Harper knew one thing with certainty. The lost hour wasn't an accident. It wasn't random. It was intentional. The bus had gone somewhere. The passengers had gone with it. And someone or something had made sure they wouldn't come back. The mystery of the Grayson commuters was no longer just about the missing. It was about what else was traveling the roads before dawn. Mile marker 37 wasn't where the bus had been found. It was 5 miles west on the older, narrower part of Route 16, where the asphalt buckled into hairline cracks and weeds pressed through the shoulder. To most drivers, it was nothing more than a green sign flashing past at 60 miles per hour. But to Sheriff Harper and his team, it became a focal point because several seemingly disconnected leads began to point there. The trucker's addendum. After his initial interview, Ron Ellis, the trucker who had last seen the bus at 6:40 a.m., called the sheriff's office again. He'd been uneasy replaying the memory. At first, he thought maybe it was his imagination, but the longer he sat with it, the more certain he became. The bus slowed right about mile marker 37, he told Deputy Mendes over the phone. Not by much, maybe dropped from 55 to 30, like it was looking for something. Didn't stop outright, but it sure as hell wasn't cruising steady. This detail caught Harper's ear. It lined up uncomfortably with the gas station footage that showed the bus idling nearby only minutes later. If Ellis's memory was correct, then mile marker 37 had been part of whatever happened during that missing stretch of time, the forgotten turnoff. Survey maps revealed something else. An unmarked service road branched off Route 16 just before mile marker 37, overgrown and unused for decades. It had once led to a limestone quarry shutdown in the late 70s, officially. The road was decommissioned, its entrance partially buried under brush and gravel. Most locals didn't even know it existed. When deputies hiked out to investigate, they found tire impressions cutting into the dirt, faint, almost erased by weather, but unmistakably recent. The tread pattern wasn't from farm trucks. It was heavy, consistent with a large vehicle, consistent with a bus. The quarry itself was a gaping scar in the earth, ringed by skeletal machinery rusting into the soil. Pools of stagnant water filled the lowest pits, reflecting the grey sky. The deputies spread out carefully, the sound of their boots crunching on loose stone, echoing like gunfire. In one of the old storage sheds, they found traces of habitation, cigarette butts, a blanket, food wrappers, a makeshift fire pit with charred wood. But the strangest find came from a deputy searching the quarry's edge. Wedged between rocks, half buried in mud, was a torn strip of fabric, navy blue polyester with a distinct white stripe. Investigators later confirmed it matched the uniform of the Grayson Transit bus drivers. Sheriff Harper's stomach nodded. The dispatcher's revelation. Meanwhile, the bus company dispatcher dug deeper into radio records. After filtering hours of static, he noticed something peculiar around the 7:20 a.m. interference event. The garbled words, "help us," were audible enough, but buried underneath were tonal spikes, short bursts evenly spaced. To the trained ear, it resembled a distress signal like Morse code. When analyzed, the bursts translated to a single word, stop. But stop where? Mile marker 37 suddenly loomed larger. Locals speak of strange lights. As word spread about the quarry, locals came forward with stories. An elderly couple, the Daltons, claimed they'd seen strange lights near mile marker 37 on the morning of the disappearance. "We were heading into town for groceries," Mrs. Dalton said. "Right about the quarry road, we saw this glow in the mist, not headlights, too wide to eat blue." Her husband added, "I thought maybe welding torches, but it wasn't no worker down there. We slowed and then the glow just blinked out." They both insisted the sighting occurred around 7 a.m. That placed it squarely in the last hour, the sheriff's night visit. Unable to let it rest, Sheriff Harper returned to mile marker 37 alone. One evening, the fog clung low, wrapping the road in an eerie silence. He parked by the hidden service road and stepped out, flashlight beam trembling against the weeds. The quarry loomed in the distance, silent but heavy like it carried memory. Harper crouched, running his hand over the faint grooves of tire marks. He closed his eyes, trying to picture the bus turning here. That's when he heard it. Not clearly, not words, but a faint thud, 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 rhythmic like hands pounding on metal. He froze, listening. The sound echoed faintly from the direction of the quarry. He swung his flashlight, but the beam fell on empty stone. By the time he scrambled down toward the pit, the sound had stopped. The lost Jew. Searchers combing the quarry days later discovered a child's shoe lodged in the mud near the lower basin. A small white sneaker, scuffed but intact. Margaret Benton identified it immediately. Her daughter Loris, the find gutted the families and confirmed what investigators had feared. The bus and its passengers had indeed been brought here, but the quarry was massive with endless crevices, machinery shells and water-filled shafts. Divers were deployed into the dark pools, their flashlights piercing murky depths. They found debris, rusting pipes and drowned tires, but no body. It was as though the passengers had vanished after arriving here. The time distortion. Deputy Mendes, who had already reported hearing children's voices, returned to the quarry on a follow-up sweep. This time, she brought a stopwatch, testing distances between the marker and the pit. But something unnerved her. Each time she walked from her cruiser at the road to the quarry's edge, her stopwatch showed discrepancies. Sometimes 2 minutes too long, sometimes 3 minutes too short. She repeated the test 6 times. Each time the duration shifted. Spooked, she logged it in her field notes, but kept quiet in briefing. She wasn't ready to explain time itself, bending in one corner of Grayson County. A breakthrough, the burn journal. Inside another abandoned shed near the quarry, deputies found a half-burned notebook. Most pages were ash, but a few words remained legible. It comes in the fog. They follow the sound. Marker 37. The handwriting was jagged, uneven, as though written in panic. Investigators couldn't determine the author, but the references to fog, sound, and the exact mile marker chilled Harper to the bone. Whoever wrote it had known something. The 6th passenger theory. At this point, Harper shared his growing suspicion with Mendez that there had been someone else on the bus that morning. Someone who wasn't supposed to be there. Ellis's comment about extra movement. The gas station silhouette that didn't match Bobby Larkin. The distress call layered with the word stop. Harper now believed the bus had been forced down the quarry road by that presence. But how had this stranger boarded? No one at the Grayson stop reported seeing a newcomer, unless, of course, the stranger had already been there, waiting in the fog, slipping inside unseen. The phantom vehicle. Just as the investigation into mile marker 37 reached fever pitch, another witness came forward. A young mechanic named Kyle Hart claimed he'd been driving Route 16 around 7:05 a.m. that morning. He hadn't seen the bus, but he had seen something else. A black van, he told deputies. Windows tinted, no plates on the back. It was pulled over by the old quarry turnoff. Thought it was weird, but I kept driving. Didn't want to mess with it. The van was never located, but it added a new dimension. Had the commuters been transferred from the bus into that van? Was the quarry just a staging ground, or was the van merely another red herring in a case already dripping with them? The sheriff's unease. Harper stood at mile marker 37 again days later, staring at the green sign that had become a grim landmark. He imagined the bus slowing, turning down the hidden road, swallowed by fog. He imagined the children crying, the driver overpowered, the passengers trapped. But what he couldn't shake was the feeling that whatever happened wasn't purely human. The static message, the Daltons' strange lights, Mendez's warped stopwatch readings. Every thread pointed back to mile marker 37 as more than a place. It was something else, a threshold. And if that were true, then the quarry wasn't just the site of an abduction. It was a doorway. By the end of the 4th week, the investigation had shifted completely. No longer were detectives asking where did the bus go. The question now was darker. What was waiting for it at mile marker 37? The evidence, tire tracks, the shoe. The burn journal proved the commuters had reached the quarry, but their fate after that was still shrouded in the fog. The case file labeled the section simply, mile marker 37, point of divergence. Harper stared at the words late one night, a hollow weight pressing in his chest. Because in his gut, he knew the quarry wasn't where the story ended. It was where it truly began. The morning fog on Route 16 was so thick you could almost slice it with a knife. Locals said it rolled in heavy near the quarry, thicker than anywhere else in Grayson County. Truckers cursed it, farmers drove around it, and some teenagers dared each other to park at mile marker 37 after dark just to see how long they could stand the silence. But in the weeks after the bus disappeared, the fog took on new meaning. It wasn't just weather anymore. It was a curtain hiding something, someone that investigators were still struggling to understand. And then came the reports, the joggers' encounter. The first came from a man named Neil Atkins, a middle-aged mechanic who jogged along Route 16 every morning before work. 3 weeks after the disappearance, he told deputies he'd been near the quarry turnoff. Around 5:30 a.m., there was a man standing by the marker. Atkins said, his voice trembling as though replaying it unnerved him. Tall, wearing a coat, not a jacket like you'd wear jogging, something longer, like an overcoat. His face was I don't know. Couldn't see it right. The fog covered it. Atkins swore the figure didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there staring into the mist as if waiting for something. When Atkins passed and looked back, the figure was gone. He refused to jog that route again. The hitchhiker rumor? Not long after, truckers began swapping stories on CB radio about a hitchhiker near mile marker 37. They said he appeared only when the fog was thickest. Some claimed they saw him standing still, thumb extended. Others swore he tried to wave them down, stepping into the road. A few admitted they stopped. One trucker, known only by his handle, Red Fox, described the encounter in chilling detail. I pulled over, he told Harper's deputy. Figured he looked like he needed help. But when I leaned across to open the door, he leaned in too. And I'll be damned if he didn't have eyes. Not regular eyes, just like glass, staring right through me. I slammed the pedal and didn't look back. When Harper asked for contact information, Red Fox stopped answering his radio. The other truckers claimed he'd taken an extended route far from Grayson County and wasn't planning on returning soon. The fireman's testimony. The most tangible account came from a young fireman named Eddie Morales. He'd been driving home late one evening when his old pickup began to sputter near the quarry road. He pulled over to check the engine. That's when he noticed a figure moving in the fog behind him. At first, I thought it was just someone walking, Eddie explained. But he didn't move right. Kept shifting, like every time I blinked, he was closer. No sound of footsteps. Eddie bolted back into his truck and locked the doors. When he looked up, the figure was right at his window. To coat buttoned to the neck, face obscured except for the suggestion of a grin. I turned the key, praying it would start, Eddie said. When I looked again, he was gone. Just gone, like the fog swallowed him. Deputies later confirmed Eddie's truck had indeed broken down, but the strange footprints in the mud around it went only halfway and then stopped as though the man had vanished mid. Harper's reluctance. Sheriff Harper wanted to treat these stories like folklore. Rural towns were full of them. Ghost trains, haunted bridges, phantom hitch. But something about the consistency of the reports unnerved him. Every story described the same figure. Tall, overcoat, face indistinct, always at or near mile marker 37, always within the fog. And when Harper cross-referenced the times of these sightings, they aligned disturbingly well with the timeline of the missing bus. Atkins's jogger sighting, about the same time the bus was last seen by Ellis. The Daltons' strange blue glow, right when the bus should have passed the quarry road. The static-laced radio signal with the word stop within the same 30 INUT window. The fog wasn't just weather, it was cover, and whatever stranger people were seeing had been there. There the morning the bus vanished. The woman on the porch. One of the eeriest testimonies came from a woman named Leah Hodge, who lived in a farmhouse about 2 miles off Route 16, on a foggy night 2 weeks after the disappearance. She was sitting on her porch when she noticed a man standing at the edge of her yard. Just outside the treeing, she told investigators, watching the house. I called out, but he didn't answer. Just kept standing there. She went inside, grabbed her phone and dialed the sheriff. By the time deputies arrived, there was no sign of anyone. But her dog, usually calm, had been whining and pacing the porch the entire night. I know what I saw, Leah insisted. And he was facing the house, not the road, not the trees, me. The sheriff's second visit. Haunted by the stories, Harper returned to mile marker 37 himself, this time with Deputy Mendez. It was 4:30 a.m. The fog was dense, curling around their cruiser headlights like smoke. They parked at the quarry road and stepped out, flashlights sweeping across the brush. For 30 minutes, nothing happened. Just the hiss of crickets and the faint drip of dew. Then Mendez whispered sharply, "Sheriff, look." Near the quarry road stood a figure, so dressed in something long, dark, the beam of Harper's flashlight cut across the fog, illuminating its outline, but not its face. "Hello," Harper called out. His voice echoed. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. Mendez reached for her weapon, but Harper raised a hand. He stepped closer, careful, his boots crunching gravel. The figure seemed to shimmer like the fog itself was bending around it. And then, without warning, it was gone. One moment standing, the next simply traced. The fog swirled where it had been, leaving only the faint impression of disturbed grass. The notebook connection. Back at the station, Harper revisited the burn journal found in the quarry. He flipped to the half-legal fragments, his pulse quickening. It comes in the fog. They follow the sound. The descriptions lined up too closely with what people were now reporting. Whoever had written the notebook had seen this stranger before. And worse, they had associated him directly with the missing commuters. The families begin to break. As word of the stranger in the fog spread, the families of the missing grew restless. Margaret Benton, Laura's mother, accused Harper of chasing ghosts instead of answers. "My daughter isn't gone because of some fogman," she snapped at a town hall meeting. "She's gone because someone took her, a person. And you're wasting time chasing shadows." But others weren't so sure. Parents spoke of their children having nightmares, dreams of tall men watching from windows, of buses driving into mist that never cleared. The missing were gone, but the fog seemed to cling to Grayson, infecting everyone with dread. The audio tape. Then came the audio. A state highway patrolman, searching through traffic surveillance archives, stumbled on a grainy recording from a roadside microphone near mile marker 37, dated the morning of the disappearance. It captured faint mechanical sounds. The bus engine, likely, but layered within was something else. A low rhythmic breathing and faintly a voice. Not human, too slow, too deliberate. It repeated the same phrase 3 times. Marker. When the lab cleaned the audio, the voice was sharper. It didn't just say, "Marker," said, "Wait the marker. They are mine." Harper's realization. The case was no longer about logistics or missing timelines, or even the bus itself. Harper now believed they were facing something or someone that had existed at mile marker 37 long before the bus came through. And for reasons he couldn't yet explain, it had chosen that morning, that fog and those passengers. He stared at the green mile marker sign on a foggy morning a week later, the mist clinging to his coat. His reflection wavered in the damp metal, fractured by droplets of dew. And in that warped reflection, for just a second, he swore he saw another figure standing beside him, face obscured, waiting. Sheriff Tom Harper had carried Grayson County on his back for nearly 2 decades. He was the kind of layman people trusted instinctively. The steady hand at the town fair, the voice on the radio during storms. The man who pulled teenagers out of wrecked trucks and sent them home with a warning rather than a record. But after the bus vanished, Harper began to unravel. Not outwardly at first. He still wore his uniform, still attended town halls, still combed through reports with his deputies. But inside, something shifted. He wasn't sleeping. He wasn't eating. He was carrying something the others didn't see. And when he disappeared, just like the commuters before him, the whole town realized the case had claimed more than passengers. It had claimed its sheriff, the cracks in Harper's armor. Deputy Carla Mendes noticed the change first. Harper's eyes were bloodshot. He was jumpy, his hand drifting to his holster at sudden noises. Twice she found him asleep in his office, slumped over maps of Route 16, his coffee long cold. "You've got to rest, Sheriff," she told him one morning. "I'll rest when we find them," he muttered. But Mendes saw something else, something Harper didn't admit. His fixation wasn't just professional. It was personal. Harper had grown up in Grayson, And the commuters weren't just names to him. They were friends, neighbors, family. And then there was Laura Benton, the missing girl whose shoe had been found at the quarry. Harper had known her since birth. He'd been at her christening. He'd given her a ride home from school when her mum's car broke down. Her disappearance cut deep. The night calls. It started with the phone calls. Harper's landline rang at odd hours. 2 a.m., 3 a.m. Each time he answered, there was silence, but not empty silence. He described it later in his notes, like someone breathing just out of reach. Not quick, not human, a low drag, like lungs pulling stone. Sometimes he swore he heard whispers threaded in words that barely formed. Marker 37. He stopped answering after the third week. But the calls didn't stop the recordings. Mendes found the tapes in Harper's desk after he vanished. He'd set up a recorder on his line capturing the late-night calls. Playing them back was chilling. At first, just static, then the faint drag of breath, and then the whisper. On the fifth recording, the whisper was clear enough to transcribe. Sheriff, the last briefing. On October 12th, Harper gathered his deputies for what would be his last official meeting. He paced the room, maps and photos spread across the table. "We've been looking at this wrong," he told them. "The quarry isn't where it ends. It's where it starts. Something is at mile marker 37. Something that took them, and it's still out there." His deputies exchanged uneasy glances. They wanted to believe he was just tired, that stress was twisting his judgment. But Harper's conviction was unshakable. He pointed at the green sign in one of the photos. "This isn't just a marker. It's a door." The patrol car at the marker. The next morning, Harper's cruiser was found idling at mile marker 37, engine running, driver's side door wide open, radio crackling with static. But Harper wasn't there. Deputies searched the surrounding brush, the quarry, the service road. Nothing. The only sign of him was his hat lying neatly on the hood of the cruiser. A detail that made Mendez's blood run cold, because Harper never removed his hat on duty. The dashcam footage. When they pulled the cruiser's dashcam, the footage was almost unwatchable. At 4:12 a.m., the camera showed thick fog rolling across the road. Headlights barely pierced it. For nearly 10 minutes, there was nothing, just grey mist. Then a figure emerged, standing directly at the marker. Harper's voice could be heard faintly. "This ends tonight." The camera shuddered as he stepped out. His silhouette crossed the beam of the headlights. He walked toward the figure. The figure didn't move. Then suddenly, the feed distorted, static tearing across the screen. When the image returned, Harper was gone. The cruiser sat alone, headlights shining into fog. The figure was no longer visible. The deputies' fracture. Harper's disappearance broke the sheriff's department. Some deputies refused to patrol Route 16 after dark. Others turned in resignations, claiming they didn't sign up for ghost hunts. Deputy Mendez, though, refused to quit. She believed Harper had left clues, breadcrumbs hidden in his obsession. She revisited his office, digging through his notes. What she found disturbed her. The journal. In Harper's personal notebook, entries shifted from measured police logs to something more frantic. "It knows me. It calls me by name. The quarry is not the origin. It's the mouth. The fog is not weather. It's cover. If I follow, maybe I can bring them back." The final entry, dated the night before his disappearance, reads simply, "The man in the fog has no face until you look, And when you do, it's your own. The town reacts. News of Harper's vanishing spread like wildfire. For some, it confirmed their worst fears, that the bus passengers were dead, and now the sheriff had joined them. For others, it deepened the mystery. Townsfolk whispered about a curse on mile marker 37. Some said Harper had gone mad, driven into the woods by grief. Others claimed he'd been taken by the same force that claimed the commuters. And then there were those who swore they'd seen him still driving alone at night, his cruiser ghosting down back roads with its lights off. The second sightings. In the weeks following, multiple residents reported seeing Harper. A farmer named Cliff Jensen swore he saw the sheriff standing in his field at dawn, coat collar pulled up, staring at the horizon. A teenager claimed she saw him in the diner parking lot, sitting in his cruiser, staring at the fog with hollow eyes. Each time, when approached, the sheriff disappeared. Mendes refused to believe he was truly gone. Not yet. The chilling audio. Weeks later, the Highway Patrol released a second audio file captured from Harper's cruiser mic, static than his voice. They're here. I can hear them. The bus, then silence. And then faintly dozens of voices crying out at once. Men, women, children calling for help. The sound of a bus engine roared in the background. Then cut to static. The sheriff joins the case file. Officially, Harper's disappearance was recorded vanishing sheriff. Unofficially, his deputies added a grim footnote. Another passenger claimed by the road. By the end of October, Route 16 was more than just a haunted stretch of highway. It was an active wound. The bus, its passengers, and now the sheriff himself, all gone within the same fog. Mendes stared at Harper's final journal entry late one night, tracing the words with her finger. When you look, it's your own. She shivered because, when she thought about that foggy figure at the quarry, she remembered something she hadn't admitted aloud. For a split second, when the flashlight beam had caught its outline, she swore the face staring back wasn't a stranger's. It was Harper's.